Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to today's video. It is finally time to talk about my favorite books that I read in 2023. I'm so excited to go through this as I'm looking at this stack of books. 2023 was a great reading year and I read so many amazing books and authors that are now all-time favorites. I'm excited to gush all about them. Some very high-level stats. I am going to do a more in-depth 2023 stats video in the future, but just to set some context before my favorites, I did read 145 books in 2023. And of those, 21 were 5 stars. So I have picked 15 of them that really are the best of the best that I want to talk through today. Basically like 5 honorable mentions and then my firm top 10 books of 2023. Let's just go ahead and get into them because I think this might be a long video. I'm going to try to keep it relatively short because I have talked about almost all of these books in other reading vlogs on my channel throughout the year. So I will mention those and link them below. If you want to go watch my thoughts in real time when I actually read these books and my thoughts were fresh, definitely go back and watch them because this is just going to be me saying, basically, I really loved these books. All right, let's get into spot number 15, Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. This was a very popular book this year. This is an adult contemporary romance. I have enjoyed multiple of this author's books. She writes emotional romances that have a lot of depth to them. This one is no different. I think this is my favorite book by this author so far, which makes me really excited to continue picking up her books in the future. But basically, this follows 2 main characters who work in a hospital together. They get off on the wrong foot, but then quickly form somewhat of a friendship when they start writing letters to each other. And it goes from there. There's a lot of family dynamics in this book, which I enjoyed. And overall, it was just a great time. I read this book in a video where I was reading books from authors that I was going to author events to go meet. So I did meet Abby Jimenez. I got this book signed. I really enjoy her as a person. And so I will link that vlog if you want to see that experience and also more of my thoughts reading this book. All right, in a similar vein, my number 14 book is also a contemporary romance. It's Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. This is a STEM romance. It's again my favorite by this author. I have read all of her adult STEM romances. This one, it just gets me. The STEM humor is great. These are 2 physicists. There's kind of a fun rivalry between the 2 main characters. Definitely less emotional than the Abby Jimenez one and more kind of nerdy, which I guess also works for me. So one of my favorite romances of the year. I did feature this in a book of the month reading vlog, so I'll link it if you want to see more thoughts, but definitely a favorite of the year. All right, my number 13 book, Shifting Gears, is pitched as a gothic thriller. This book was actually my number 1 favorite aardvark book that I read this year. So I've already talked about it in a different video, but it's Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. This, once again, is my favorite book that I've read by this author so far. This one I just had so much fun reading. It's not like edge of your seat type thriller where you're turning the pages, wondering if these characters are gonna get out alive, but more character driven. And I really enjoyed these characters learning their secrets and basically rooting for them to get out of this oppressive religious town that they live in. I enjoyed the 2 main characters in that they are opposites, yet they're both outcasts and ostracized from their community, so they find solace in each other. They team up and I had a really fun time reading about their experiences. All right, switching gears again to get into my number 12 favorite book. As you'll see, I like to read a lot of genres and I like to see them all kind of represented in my favorites. But one of my favorite historical fictions of the year that I read is Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez. This is a book that came out in 2022 and I read it this year for the first time on the recommendation of a couple of my friends here on BookTube who read a lot of historical fiction. They loved it and recommended it, so I knew I was going to enjoy this book and I'm so glad I finally made time for it. This book handles a lot. It talks about mainly this case in the South in 1973. We follow this main character who is a nurse at this clinic and she is dispensing birth control, and one of the topics that comes up in here is giving birth control to minors. Ultimately, it goes into this case of these 11 and 13-year-old girls who are sterilized without their consent. They're minors, so they couldn't even give their consent, but basically this nurse gets wrapped up in this situation and it's a lot about fighting for bodily autonomy, what it means for women to have rights over their own bodies. Very timely, even though it's obviously set in the past. A lot of these topics are pertinent to today, and I really enjoyed reading it. Emotional, impactful, everything I want from this type of book. totally delivered, and I would highly recommend it if that sounds like a genre and topic that's interesting to you. All right, getting into my number 11 book of the year, probably my favorite true thriller that I read this year is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This is about a main character who is house sitting in this kind of isolated location. She reads a book, she leaves a bad review for it. That author tries to get her to take it down. She doesn't do it. And then next thing she knows, she thinks this author is coming after her in this house that she's at by herself. Super twisty turny, heart pounding. I love that type of thriller. So if that's what you're looking for, you can't really do wrong with Taylor Adams. I loved the atmosphere of this like seaside, abandoned, isolated house. And if you're into thrillers but for some reason haven't picked this one up, I think it delivered on everything I look for from this genre. All right, top 10. My number 10 book is called The Space Between Here and Now by Sarah Suk. This is a young adult sci-fi book that has a lot of emotional family elements to it. I read this for a NetGalley ARC reading vlog that I highly recommend you go back and watch if this is a genre you're interested in, because this book took me by surprise. I haven't really heard anyone else talk about it, but I think a lot of people could really like it. It actually reminds me a lot of this book, The Astonishing Pillar of After by Emily Exarpan, which I know a lot of people on BookTube really enjoyed several years ago. So did I. I gave it 5 stars, and this book I thought was just as good. Similar in theme in that it's about a teenage girl who has lost her mom and she's feeling really disconnected from her dad, and she's struggling with this scientific disorder that she has where sometimes she will randomly disappear from her current life and go into basically like a flashback from an earlier time in her life, and she can watch things that previously happened, and she's like a ghost in that time, and she just has to wait it out and watch whatever's happening, and she disappears from her regular life for that same amount of time. So it causes a lot of disruption in her life. And again, she's trying to talk to her dad about it, but it's not getting through to him. So it's kind of a coming of age grief story through the lens of this sci-fi situation. So I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I highly recommend it, and I want other people to pick it up. In my number 9 spot, we've got another surprise, a book that I wasn't sure if I was going to enjoy or not based on the genre that I've seen, but it's The Wishing Game by Meg Schaefer. I'm so glad I pushed through all the reviews that were saying this is fantasy, because it's not. It's just kind of a whimsical, heartwarming contemporary book. It covers the topic of adoption, but also has this plot that involves games and riddles, which I'm a big fan of. Kind of the perfect mix of fun and emotional. It was definitely my type of book, and I gave it 5 stars. Again, read it for a book of the month reading vlog, so if you want more specific thoughts or a more specific synopsis, you can check that out. In my number 8 position, a book that I can't believe I didn't read until this year, it's Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is somewhat of a modern sci-fi classic, was originally written in 1979, and it's about this woman who is just living her life when all of a sudden she gets transported back in time. It ends up being this recurring thing in her life, and it's clear when she's sent back, she's being sent back to help very specific people, and it's interesting to see her grapple with that, along with the differences in time from her present day to when she's flashed back to. She's a Black woman, and in the past timeline, she's going to a plantation. So she's not only trying to save this person she's supposed to save, but also keep herself alive and safe. It's very interesting, and I'm so glad I read this because it's interesting reading a time travel book written so far in the past. And I loved seeing how this trope has kind of evolved over time and how now modern day books are pulling inspiration from a book like this. I just really enjoyed it. I not only enjoyed it as a book, but I also appreciated it as a modern classic. Written by a woman of color, I loved everything about it. If you haven't read this book, but you enjoy the sci-fi genre, I think it should be borderline required reading. It was so good and so worth it. And it was my 8th favorite book of the year. All right, let's shift gears again back to another contemporary romance book. My number 7 favorite book is Stars in Your Eyes by Kaysen Callender. This is a male-male emotional romance about these 2 characters who are both actors, and they star in a movie together. They've got very different personalities and reputations, and they were put in this movie together for reasons. They're also forced to kind of fake date to promote this movie, and this book is just all about their lives and their romance together. It spans many, many years of their lives, which normally isn't something I'm a huge fan of. I prefer shorter timeline contemporaries and romances, but for some reason this one worked for me. I think because I just fell deeply in love with these characters. I appreciated the growth we got to see. They are very flawed human beings and they have to work through a lot within themselves as well as with each other. And we got to see all of it. I loved it. Also read this one for an ARC reading vlog, so if you haven't seen that, I will link it below. But so good. I also love this cover a lot, so I'm a sucker for pretty covers, which you will see more of in the next few books. My number 6 favorite book of this year, we are really getting into like the cream of the crop here, guys. If I See You Again Tomorrow by Robbie Couch. This is a young adult sci-fi book about a guy who is stuck in a time loop. And in this time loop, he realizes that the only other person who seems to be in this time loop, or that doesn't repeat the same exact thing every day, is this other guy. So he has to figure out why that is, and then eventually they form a relationship within this time loop, which is very fun and creative. I am a sucker for a time loop sci-fi type story, especially one with emotional elements, as I talked about before. This has all of that. Plus, again, come on, one of the most beautiful covers of the year. I read one other book by this author this year and enjoyed it, and will continue to keep my eye out for everything he publishes in the future. I am a fan, and if this sounds up your alley, highly recommend. All right, next on my list, number 5 is Adrift by Lisa Bordeaux. This is a thriller book with a little bit of a kind of sci-fi climate fiction type twist to it. The initial pitch of it is that it's about this woman who wakes up on a boat all by herself with no memory of who she is or how she got there. And I don't think it's worth spoiling anything else about it, but if you like that type of mystery where you're finding things out with our main character and you're interested in a book that is set in the not too distant future with a lot of climate related commentary within it, I think you should read this book. This is, I believe, my highest ranked debut book on this list. Since reading and reviewing this book, I've interacted with this author a few times on social media, and she's super nice. So I love that I get to keep talking about and promoting this book to new readers, because I haven't seen a ton of buzz about it in my circles. But this was a very pleasant surprise this year. So glad I picked this one up on NetGalley based on the premise alone. It delivered against its premise, and it's the type of book that I think about often, even though it's been several months since I read this book. So how many times can I say it? Highly recommend, and I think it's well worth a read. All right, my number 4 favorite book is an author that many people will not be surprised to see, because she has had books on a couple of my favorites lists in the past few years. It's The Jump by Brittany Morris. This is a young adult contemporary book about this group of teenagers who are code breakers. They like to enter code breaking competitions together, which, come on, that is so me and was so fun to read about. What I really loved about this book is this diverse group of characters and how different they all are, and how this book really highlights the value of diversity and how having different backgrounds and skill sets and points of view really adds to the strength of a group, especially when you have an objective like solving riddles and breaking codes where you need diverse perspectives and ways of thinking. I just love a book that has a message like that. I enjoyed this as a full-grown adult, but I would totally recommend this book to young adult readers. This is my highest ranking young adult book on this list. So if you haven't checked out this book, or really any of Brittany Morris's young adult books, I can't recommend them enough. My number 4 favorite book of 2023. Okay, really getting down to it now. We are at number 3, and all of these top 3 books are some form of mystery. That's something I really gravitate towards in books. I like almost every book to have some sort of mystery element, but if you are looking for just a true blue mystery that you can sink your teeth into, you can take notes and try to figure out what happened, you just want a good old-fashioned murder mystery, let me introduce you to The Enigma of Room 622 by Joelle Dicker. This is a mystery, like I mentioned. It is set in Switzerland and was originally written in French, and this is obviously the translated version to English. And it's about this hotel that had a murder happen in room 622 that is a big mystery. No one really knows what happened. We've got 2 timelines, as a couple of people staying at this hotel in the present day are trying to solve this mystery of what happened in the past in room 622. And it's just so satisfying. This book is pretty long. I think it's actually the longest book that I read this year. Almost 600 pages. So it's definitely a slow burn. I recommend taking notes on who the characters are, which is not something I normally enjoy or would recommend, but in this one it worked, and it made for just the most satisfying conclusion. As all of the pieces click into place, there are a few twists and reveals in here that really shocked and surprised me. I read this book for the Backlist Readathon, which I did a vlog for and can link it below, but I remember having to hop on immediately after finishing this book to talk about it because it just was one of the most satisfying mysteries that I have read, maybe ever, but definitely in a long time. So if you like murder mysteries, just trust me, pick this up, and come on, this book is so gorgeous. Maybe my favorite book cover of this year because of the like gold foiling details. You can't really see it on camera probably, but even like details within each of these rooms are shiny gold, and I just loved it. So good. And the couple of people who have picked this book up on my recommendation have also given it 5 stars, so I feel very confident in it as a recommendation at this point. All right, my top 2 books. Honestly, both of these books could be my number 1 of the year. They are the books that I recommend the most. Like if I have people on social media asking for favorite books of the year or books we would recommend the most, underhyped books that we wish got more love, both of these are top of my list. But the one I put in my number 2 spot is called Symphony of Secrets by Brandon Slocum. This is an art copy. I will put up a picture of the finished cover because I think it's cooler, but this is a mystery book, also more of a historical fiction type book about this classical music professor who one day gets a phone call that he's getting the opportunity to transcribe the work of his all-time favorite composer. And when he starts digging into that music, he realizes that the composer might not have been the one to actually write the music. And so it dives into the mystery of who was actually behind this composer's music and kind of the scandal that becomes of it, because who was actually behind it seems to be this young Black woman who never got any of the credit or the fame or riches or anything. I know that synopsis is very random. I have no personal tie to classical music, no personal interest, but one of my favorite things in books is when an author has a deep passion and knowledge for a subject that I'm not an expert in, and I can basically learn through them and feel that passion through them, through their writing in a book. And this is that to a T. This is the second mystery book this author has written that centers around classical music as a topic, and I appreciate it so much for introducing me to that field of work that I know nothing about. He makes it so interesting, and the way he writes about music in this book specifically, it's just fascinating, and specifically the composition of music and how it comes together and how new melodies and ways to write music come about. It's just interesting, but also the mystery element that this present day guy is trying to solve. It's intriguing. It has a social justice element to it that I always love. So I basically have nothing bad to say about this book. I know that others who have read Brandon Slocum have really enjoyed him. I still just don't think he gets enough love on BookTube and on social media. So if you haven't picked this book up and you like historical fiction and or mystery books, please pick it up, then talk to me about it after. This one is so, so good. All right, and then we are at my number 1 favorite book of 2023. This one isn't going to be a surprise to anyone who knows me really at all and has watched my videos throughout the year because I've talked about it several times. I first read this book in a NetGalley ARC reading vlog, and as soon as I finished it, I had to get a finished copy. So I got a signed copy by the author. It's Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. Like I said, I got a signed copy from the author, and I've chatted with her a few times on social media. She's great. But this is basically a family-centered mystery book about this family whose father goes missing, and the only person who knows what happened or was there with him in his final moments was the son of this family, who has autism and Angelman syndrome and is non-speaking. So nobody can get answers from him about what really happened, and it's about the solving of that through the eyes of the daughter in this family. And I can tell you, this main character's perspective, her point of view, and the way Angie Kim wrote her is so specifically the reason I loved this book, that it makes it so that I can understand why this book isn't everybody's favorite book, but it worked so well for me that I can't not have this as my favorite book of the year. Somebody named this style of writing as nerdy narration, and I've really latched onto that because it does suit it well and I love it, but the main character is very detailed in her descriptions. Basically everything she says, she has to qualify with more details or has to relate it back to a situation that gives additional context to explain her point of view. This book has footnotes throughout it. that, again, just add details to the story that some people might find boring, but I found so interesting and fun to read, and they added to the story in a really great way. This book covers interesting philosophical issues that I had never really thought about, but now are part of my like everyday life. I think about this book and the topics related to like happiness on a very frequent basis. This is the type of book that I can 100% see myself rereading in the future. Now that I have the physical copy, I would love to annotate it. It just worked for me in the best way. So if your reading taste is at all aligned with mine, if you've enjoyed other books on this list and you think you would enjoy this book, I'm telling you, go out and buy it and read it right now. Or don't buy it, get it from the library, get the audiobook, whatever. It just impacted me deeply. It made me emotional. It made me think. I enjoy all of those things. The ending is a little bit ambiguous, which again, not something I normally enjoy in books, but for some reason, this book, I appreciate it more because of its ending. It just worked for me in every way. So my favorite book of 2023, I'm so happy to say, is Happiness Falls. And honestly, all the books that I talked about in this video, I am just in love with. So please let me know if you have also read any of the books that I talked about and what your thoughts were on them. If not, let me know what your favorite book of this year was. Thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you for watching all of my videos this year if you've stuck around, or if you're new, thanks for stopping by. I cannot wait to see what I get into in 2024. I've already started a bit of my reading and content for 2024, and it's gonna be a great time, so hopefully you'll stick around. But otherwise, I don't think I have anything else, so thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.